I took my affair partner to our son's graduation. He moved out that night and blocked my number. This post is going to be a little bit confusing, and I know I won't win any favors by posting it here, but I have no other choice. I need advice as soon as possible on what to do and how to save my marriage. I have read other posts on here, and I never imagined that I would one day make my own, but here I am, pleading with a bunch of strangers to help me with a problem I sort of caused. My name is Emily, female 41, and I met my husband Henry, male 43, when I was in my final year of college. I was studying social work, and due to the horrible state of most of the dorms back then, I had to get a place off campus. I had a job at the time, but even at that, I often had to ask my parents to chip in just so I could continue paying my rent. I didn't live in the safest or nicest part of town, and my apartment was incredibly tiny. I tried to decorate as much as I could so it wouldn't look so depressing, but it was no use. My things were always everywhere because of how cramped it was, and I only got a tiny bit of sunlight each day because of the small windows. This made me want to avoid going back to my apartment as much as I could. It meant that I spent hours after all my classes were done still in school. Sometimes I would spend time with my friends, and other times I would try to catch up with the syllabus in the library. There was one place, though, that I probably spent more time in than school, and my apartment combined, and that was my best friend Sarah's place. Sarah wasn't like me. Her parents were incredibly wealthy and helped her get a decent-sized apartment close to campus. I say decent-sized, but really it was massive compared to mine, and compared to what they rent to younger people these days. I would go over to her place as much as I could, and I would even spend the night there when it was convenient. It was on one of my trips to her place to study for a test we had the next day that I bumped into Henry. Like I said, she lived in a richer part of town, but I didn't have to know that to guess that Henry was well off. He just gave off that vibe. I almost missed the elevator when I go to Sarah's building and yelled at whoever was inside to hold the door, which Henry did. He looked like he was only a few seconds away from bursting out laughing as he watched me pant and try to regain my breath from my sprint. He tried to make conversation as the elevator went up, but I was too busy worrying about the fact that I hadn't studied at all, so I barely responded. It wasn't until we both got off on the same floor that I decided to humor him a little. It was the least he deserved for helping me hold the door. We talked for a bit as we walked down the hallway and said our goodbyes when I got to Sarah's door. I thought maybe this would be the last I would see of him, but it wasn't. He lived a few doors away from Sarah's. I'd only find out later that he had just moved into the building, which meant that I saw him almost every time I came to visit Sarah. I made a point to ignore and avoid his flirtation as much as I could at first. I'd thought that I was too busy and had no time to entertain a relationship since school was getting busy. But eventually, again my better judgment, and despite how much I tried, I ended up becoming kind of enamored with him. Henry was charming and funny in a way that my previous partners hadn't been, and I think that it helped that he had already graduated and had a job. He was mature, or at least more mature than the boys in my year, and he was stable. He had a job, a place, ambition. It was different being with someone who had their life together so well. We started dating only a few weeks after we first met, and honestly, it was great. I'd go over to Sarah's place to study, but spend the night at Henry's, and sometimes, although very rarely, he would come to my place and hang out for a bit. The only person who ever even came close Henry's perfectness was my friend and course mate, Dennis. He also lived in my building, and because we not only went to the same school, but we were also studying the same thing, that meant that we often walked to school together. Our building had mostly older people in it. We were both thankful that we'd found a friend in each other. This all makes it sound like we were pretty close, and that's because we spent nights together studying and most of our days together on campus. You're probably wondering why I never dated Dennis in all that time since we were very close, and we cared for each other. But our relationship never became anything romantic because Dennis had a girlfriend, his high school sweetheart, and I always went out of my way to maintain boundaries because of that. Now, some of you are probably also wondering what Henry thought of our friendship. Well, to put plainly, he didn't like it. They met for the first time one night when Henry came over to my apartment to surprise me with dinner and found Dennis already cooking me dinner as we went over his notes. The whole thing looked way too cozy, but I assured Henry that we were just friends. We all sat down together for an awkward dinner, and he glared at Dennis the entire time. Eventually, though, as the months passed, Henry calmed down, as he realized that Dennis wasn't any serious threat to our relationship. We dated for my entire last year of college, and only a few weeks after graduating did I find out that I was pregnant. I thought about things for a long while before I decided to keep it, and then I thought about things for even longer before I decided to tell Henry. We were so young and I was barely out of college. I expected him to back out, and honestly, I wouldn't have blamed him for it. I didn't exactly have the money or the space, but I was sure that I wanted to keep and raise the baby. But to my surprise, not only did he not leave me, he also suggested that we get married as soon as we could. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and I wanted to slow down a bit and give us some time to talk things through, but he seemed totally convinced that this was what he wanted. So we got married. It was more than a bit rushed and quick. It came as a surprise to both of our families who had only known we were dating for a few months. I cared for Henry, and I liked being with him, so I wasn't opposed to marrying him. It made sense, especially since we were going to be parents soon. I don't know if we ever really got to the point of loving each other before he proposed. Of course, I fell in love with him as the years passed on. I don't think it's possible to be with someone for as long as I was with Henry and not love them, but back then, I don't know, everything was so fast. It felt like I hit 2 important milestones so quick. It was more than overwhelming, and to top it off, I could never shake the feeling of wondering if Henry would have ever proposed if I wasn't pregnant. The months that followed after we got married were fine, even good sometimes. I moved out of my apartment and into his place. My apartment wasn't the best, but I was sad to leave, and even sadder to leave Dennis. Our friendship had continued after we'd graduated, but I knew that it would most likely fizzle out now that I was married and had a kid on the way. I was glad that I was closer to Sarah, at least, and that Henry was so doting and loving as the time passed and my belly grew. The pregnancy ended up being a high-risk one, which meant that I could no longer job hunt or move around like I used to. It meant that I couldn't really do much, honestly, except hang back at the apartment and try to rest, so my blood pressure wouldn't spike. My mom would come over when she could to not only keep me company, but help out around the place. Henry worked in the business world. I never really knew the specifics of his job or really cared to ask. I just knew that it kept him busy a lot. But despite his never-ending responsibilities, he made time to take care of me and take me to the hospital for every single checkup and test. He would surprise me with trips to the store to pick out baby clothes. We didn't yet know the gender in those early months, but he told me that didn't matter. So we picked both boy clothes and girl clothes alike just in case. It was comforting to have him by my side and for him to be so attentive when he had the time to be. But I couldn't help some lingering feeling that something was wrong, or that things were about to go wrong, and those feelings only got worse as the baby grew. At first I dismissed it as worry about the pregnancy, but eventually I had to come to terms with the fact that that wasn't it. Of course, I was still worried and scared about my baby. With the way the doctors had listed out all the risks and potential awful outcomes, there was no way I couldn't be but that other feeling. It was completely different. I wouldn't know what it was until after hours of labor and pain, when they brought my baby to me and I held him in my arms. I was delirious with pain despite the epidural, and I was crying from how tired I was, but I was happy. Happy that he was okay, and that I was okay. My happiness stopped short when Henry came closer to see and hold the baby, and I watched him frown. It would only be later, after a few more days in the hospital and long ride back to the apartment, that he would comment on the baby not looking like him. He played it off as a joke, but it immediately set me on edge, and I tried to play it off too, by telling him that our son couldn't possibly look like anyone at that age. He seemed to accept that answer and drop the matter, at least for a while, but his comment continued to disturb my mind. As the years passed, so many things changed. We moved into a new house, Henry got promoted, I got a job. And as our son grew, tension between us kind of grew with him, because he was right. He didn't look like Henry. Henry was blonde with brown eyes, but Finn had brown hair, almost black. This wasn't anything serious since I'm a brunette, but my eyes are brown too, and Finn's are green. There was an unspoken challenge in Henry's eyes each time he looked at Finn, like he wanted to ask a question he knew he couldn't. This tension continued for years, but it never stopped Henry from being a good father. He adored Finn and treated him accordingly. All his brewing contempt and distaste was saved for me, and it only got worse and worse as Finn grew older. Our marriage became distant and strained, but we both continued to stay silent and not acknowledge anything. I devoted most of my time to raising my son, and I threw myself into helping other kids through my work. My bosses decided that I would be a good fit for an outreach program in partnership with another nonprofit, and I agreed, so they sent me to work with other social workers and kids in another area. That was when everything changed. I'd been working at this other nonprofit for a few weeks when I saw him. It had been almost 20 years since the last time that we spoke or saw each other, but I immediately recognized him. It was Dennis. He was one of the social workers. I wasn't sure what to do at first, whether I should go up to him or pretend like we didn't know each other since it had been so long, but he surprised me by rushing up to me and pulling me in for a hug. It was so good to see him again after so long. We decided to get coffee after work to catch up and chat. That was when I learned that he'd moved away not too long after I'd gotten married. He'd moved to a different city to be with his girlfriend, but after a few years of trying to make things work, they eventually separated. He asked me how I was doing, and I told him about my work and my son. I avoided telling him too much about Henry. Even though our relationship had been, for the most part, strictly friendly, it still felt strange to bring Henry up, so I didn't. That day started what would eventually become routine for us. We would work together and then get coffee or lunch or even dinner to debrief and talk. It was so comforting getting to know him all over again and getting to be close to him like I used to be. Of course, I kept our reunion away from Henry. Everything between Dennis and I was completely platonic, or at least it was at first, so I didn't feel the need to let Henry know about all my movements and friendships. But rekindling my friendship with Dennis came with a price. For years, I'd lived in blissful and hopeful ignorance. I'd pushed whatever doubts and worries that I had deep inside me and ignored them whenever they bubbled up, but being so close to Dennis, it all came springing back up again. You know how something can seem so obvious, but you still don't notice it? Okay, no, it's not that you don't notice it. It's that you're so desperate for what you want to be true that you pretend not to notice it. That was what happened with me and Dennis. Of course, I knew from the beginning that Finn wasn't exactly the spitting image of Henry, and that there was only one other man that had been in my life who had green eyes. But still, I was completely convinced that Finn was Henry's son. There was no way he couldn't be. So I brushed off all of Henry's snarky comments and suspicious looks. But now, Dennis was in my life again, and his presence brought up memories. Some that I was grateful to remember, and some that I would have rather they stayed buried. One night, we were getting dinner together, and we'd had a couple of drinks, so we started reminiscing, laughing about crazy professors and exams. We thought we would definitely fail, and then he brought up graduation day. Henry couldn't come with me because he was visiting family, so that night, I went back to my apartment and Dennis and I got shit-faced. We were so drunk that we kept laughing at everything. Nothing seemed real or important in that moment, in my tiny apartment. So when he kissed me, I didn't think about his girlfriend or my boyfriend. I could only think about how much I wanted to do it. We tumbled into bed and things were over in a matter of minutes, and we were passed out in less than that. It was so quick and we never talked about it again, so I must have just forgotten. Those memories came rushing back to me. That night had happened only weeks before I found out I was pregnant. I couldn't even remember if we actually had sex or just fooled around, but it made me nauseous all the same. I told Dennis that I had to leave and left before he could stop me, and then I ignored him for days, which was hard to do since we worked together, but I tried my best. Eventually I couldn't anymore, and he cornered me in one of the offices. He told me that what happened had happened almost 20 years ago, and that it was best if we just forget about it. He didn't bring up Finn or Henry, and I was grateful. He asked that we just continue to be friends, and I eventually agreed. Our lunches continued like usual, and I pretended like I didn't remember a thing. It was easier that way, but things would only get complicated again one night when we went out for dinner again. We'd gotten a bit drunk, so we couldn't drive. His place was closer, so he invited me to it. That way I could rest, maybe drink some coffee, and get less drunk before I went back home. I said yes. I don't really remember how it happened. One minute he was unlocking his door, and the next we were pushing each other against it. Things didn't end with that kiss, though. We ended up in his bed, and I know this is awful, but it was amazing. I'm not sure if it was fortunate or not that I wasn't too drunk to not remember what had happened this time. We didn't avoid each this time, and our night together wasn't the last time. We continued to see each other for months. I had to do a little bit of sneaking around and explaining, mostly to Finn and hardly ever to Henry. Henry had work, and Finn was so much older now, too busy with his friends and school to worry about what his mother was doing or why she got back from work so late. We had to sneak around at the office too. Fraternizing wasn't strictly forbidden, but it wasn't exactly encouraged, and it wouldn't exactly look great. Me being sent to another organization to work and help people only to start up an illicit affair instead. I'm not stupid. I knew, somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew that there would be consequences for what I was doing, and that there was no way for any of it to end well. But I had been lonely for so long, my relationship with Henry could barely be called that, and it was so good to be with Dennis again. I'd forgotten how special and easy what we had was, and now that we'd found each other again, I didn't want to give it up like I did before. What I felt for him, as confusing as it was, made me happy, and that made me reckless. My affair with him continued for about a year, and soon enough, my baby boy was 18, and he was graduating. It felt unsurprising when Henry told me that he wouldn't be able to make it. To his credit, he apologized for days and even got Finn a new phone to compensate. He needed to take care of a few things at work, he'd said. I'd asked him why someone else couldn't be the one to take care of it, and reminded him how important the day was, but he said that he was the head manager and no one else could do it. I was angry and upset, and I know it wasn't smart to do what I did next, but I did it anyway. I invited Dennis to the graduation. Looking back now, I can understand that there were a number of reasons why I did it. I was upset. I wanted to spite Henry. Part of me wanted to see if there was truly a resemblance. There were so many things that led to that decision, but they don't matter because the decision should never have been made. Dennis was wary when I brought it up to him. We had been skirting the issue of his potential connection to Finn for months, so this seemed to come out of nowhere, but I assured him that it was all right and that he had nothing to be worried about. After a while of convincing him, he agreed to come. I told Finn that a friend from work would be coming with me, just to accompany me since his dad wouldn't be coming, and he told me that he didn't mind. Everything after that was going well. Dennis and I sat down through all the long speeches from the school staff, and there were tears in my eyes when I saw Finn decked out in his gown and cap. I had convinced myself that everything would be fine, but I didn't realize just how wrong I was until it was time for Finn to go up on stage and collect his diploma. I watched from the crowd as he collected it and shook his principal's hand. I was sure I clapped louder than everyone else. I was so happy. But then the smile was wiped off my face when I watched him walk off the stage and saw that Henry was there waiting for him. I watched him pull Finn into a hug, and then I watched them walk back together. I stood frozen as they came closer to us. There was no time to act, and I saw the exact moment Henry made eye contact with me and then with Dennis. I watched him frown, and then look at Finn, and then look back at Dennis. I could see what he saw, and I could tell the conclusions he was making. Before I could say anything, he whispered something to Finn, and then hugged him before he walked away. I tried to chase after him, but I couldn't. There were too many people, and I had to act natural so Finn wouldn't suspect anything. I pretended like everything was fine, but inside I was panicking and going crazy, wondering where Henry had gone. It was only when I got home that night, after telling Dennis that I could no longer see him, that I realized just how badly I'd messed up. All of Henry's things were gone, and he wasn't answering his phone. I asked Finn what his father has told him before he left, and he told me that Henry said he had left work to surprise him and show up for his big day, but that he had to leave for a while because of some work overseas, so he would see him in a few weeks. I knew that there was no work overseas. Henry had seen me with Dennis, and he had seen the slight resemblance between him and Finn. He must have recognized Dennis in that moment, realized that he was the guy he'd always been worried about and had never liked while we were dating. I was lonely, and our marriage was less than ideal, but that didn't mean that I wanted it to end. We'd been married for almost 20 years. There was no way that it could just all end like that. I refused to believe it. I refused to believe that my marriage was over. What would possibly tell Finn, or my family? It's been a few weeks since graduation day, and unfortunately Dennis hasn't stopped calling. I've tried to reach out to Henry, but there has been no response. I'm almost certain that Finn has been speaking to him, and what happened a few days ago confirmed it. I came home from work to find that Finn wasn't there and some of his things were gone. I know that he's probably gone to wherever his father went, which means that Henry must have told him something. And to add to all of that, I'm not sure if I still have my job. Dennis's bosses must have noticed something between us and informed mine. I got an email last night saying that I needed to come in on Monday. It feels like I've lost everything. I can't reach my husband. My son won't talk to me. And now my job might be at stake. I need help and advice because I have no idea what I'm supposed to do or what I can do to fix any of this.